Soul Coach coming at you today. Thank you for watching this episode, the inaugural episode of Pages Illuminated, brought to you by LifeGrove. We're really excited to bring you this property, this docu-series and spiritual book club, which will help you illuminate some of the ancient and more contemporary texts about spirituality, about spiritual awakening, and how we can use the knowledge and concepts within to help us down our own path of developing body, mind, and spirit. But before we get into the episode, I just wanted to drop you a line about LifeGrove. Who is LifeGrove? What do we do? What's our mission? Well, quite simply, LifeGrove is a collection of expert practitioners and healers, spiritual teachers who are fixed on one single goal, and that is to raise global human consciousness, to allow people to explore their spirituality in a safe and sacred environment. And we do that in a number of different ways, whether it's through blogs and practitioner services on lifegrove.org, or in online courses and workshops at lifegroveacademy.org. But even cooler than both of those properties, we do have the Grove. What is the Grove? The Grove is sacred media, right? You know about social media, right? Social media is where you connect with your friends and your family, and you express your opinions and your voice. Well, the Grove is no different than that. It's one of our sacred properties, and we've developed this sacred space so that you can explore your spiritual and personal development in a safe place with open hearts and open minds, just like yourself. I like to call it the no BS social media, or in other words, sacred media. We'd love to invite you to join us there at www.grovesocial.org at this time, so that you can get into even deeper discussions about the topics that we're going to be bringing up here in Pages Illuminated. We are looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
Welcome everybody to the first episode of Pages Illuminated Spiritual Book Club. And today I'm joined with Christopher Lee. Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing? I'm excited about this.
I'm doing good, man. Me too, dude. This is going to be cool. And today we both have a copy of it, and we're going to be talking about Alan Watts's The Book.
Ba-bam.
Probably one of my favorites of his books. It's one thing, and this is something I felt like I had a really good analogy for Alan Watts. When I first started kind of getting into spirituality and trying to just kind of understand my own conscious mind, one of the funniest things that I realized was that like Alan Watts is super dense. Like when you start looking at other authors and start reading other books, you start to see like Ram Dass is kind of has a real gentle way of like bringing you to that point of awareness, where like sometimes I'd be reading Alan Watts and just be like, I would read like one page and have to stop and just be like, okay, what does that mean? What is he trying to say here? And it was just a real thinker. But what it made me think of is almost like a meat tenderizer for the mind. Like he just comes in and just pounds your brain, softens it up. And then when you start to read other authors, it becomes very, very easy to understand what they're saying because he's so blunt and just kind of paints it in a very like detailed way.
I agree. He does it in a very finesse way, though. You know,
you
use the words blunt and meat tenderizer, but he speaks to you on a level that you can understand, right? Even though it is dense material, even though some of the concepts are very dense, he has a way of speaking to the you behind the you, if you will, to use an analogy that he's very fond of using. The I that knows me, you know?
That's right. And, yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, well, this is an interesting book to kick things off. You know, being generally speaking, you'd want to, in a book club of sorts, start out with a primer.
This is the one.
This is the one. Although I think it's an intimidating read for a lot of people, and for good reason. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have more notes than I have pages in the first chapter. More notes than on the first page of this book, because he can slam so much conceptual knowledge into one area, but at the same time eloquently and articulately speak to the part of you that's going to understand the consciousness, if you will, not necessarily the ego.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've noticed, so this is actually one of the first books I started reading when I started kind of having these intuitional, almost like being guided in a direction. And there were so many times when I'd be listening to, I started with his lectures, and his lectures they were all kind of saying the same thing. It's just that he has a good way of kind of painting it in a different picture each time. And it kept talking, just like you said, talking to the me behind the me. That's what really brought it out of me. I would sit here and ponder on what he was saying, and I'd be like, well, what does that mean? And then slowly but surely, that part of me started to come out. And then when I started reading his books, especially this one, he doesn't waste any time getting to the point, right? Like the famous line in this book is, "You're it."
Mm. Yeah. And that really is the point, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
It's
it.
that easy to squash it once you're there. But the journey that he takes the reader on, or even the listener, if you listen to his lectures, is so full of wonder, amazement, and adventure, that I feel like we should just kind of bust right into it. And I had a couple of points that I wanted to hit on first. Just the title of the first chapter evoked some really interesting concepts in me. Excuse me. This time around, this is my second or probably third read through of this book. And like you said, it kind of echoes a lot of what he talks about in his lectures as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the title of the chapter is Inside Information. And he goes into, pretty good depth right off the bat, talking about initiation. And in our current culture, the current events, the things that are going on in our world, I often speak to this lack of initiation quite often because I see it in everyone. People are kind of wandering around, not knowing what their place is in the world. What am I here to do? What's my meaning? What's my purpose? What's my story? And you gain these sorts of things through levels of initiation. Now, our society has, to some extent, dissolved many of these. Some of them are considered barbaric now, rites of passage, or something that we've put in the past. Some cultures still maintain it. You have your bat mitzvah, you have certain cultures will still have like a warrior initiation. However, here in the West, largely, we have lost that transition from, say, just like boy to manhood, or girls actually have a natural women have a natural initiation from femininity, in their femininity, from girl to matronliness.
Yeah,
Did I just
definitely.
say? Anyways, moving from girl to woman. I was thinking about like the triple moon goddess here, but it's interesting that he starts out with this topic of initiation. And I wanted to ask you the question, Cameron, why is it now that we are not in the know as he speaks about it? What is it that has drawn us to this point where we don't know anymore what we are?
I think that as society has changed, right? So like an example of in the book, the first like couple pages, he talks about how in Japan, when you become, an adult, they give you a book, and the book talks about sex, like breaks it down, because it's not something that they talk about in their culture. It's something that's, it's bedroom talk. And then this little book kind of gives you the know-how. And that's what he wants to do with this book, because as you said, we have a lack of it in our society. If you look back and think about like Native American tribes, right? Think about how spiritually inclined they were, and how they were in tune with nature. We have gotten so far away from that because of things like technology, our phones, our computers. All of these things have become a distraction from the me that's behind the me, as it were said. And the more that we progress in technology and all these things, it's really just about distractions. And who knows if that was on purpose or if it's just by the nature of things. But really what it comes down to is, in other cultures, there is and has always been a connection to spirituality. But as we have moved further in time, we've gotten more far away from that. Again, whether that's because of on purposeness or just the nature of becoming technologically advanced and having these things that just are continuing to distract us. And something that he talks about in the book and in his lectures and all of his books is really about like being present, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being satisfied with what you already have and who you already are. Because the basis of this book, what he wants you to know is that you're it. You are what you're looking for. You are everything and everything. When you accept that, and when you go inward, when you accept that everything is going to be okay, that depression is just in your mind, that fear is just in your mind, that is the real you behind the you. That is the God you.
Mm. It's powerful stuff. And I want to keep kind of going through this bullet by bullet because he unpacks the information in such a way that makes it relevant to us in our time. And really what we're seeing, even though he wrote this in the late 50s, early 60s. But I wanted to ask you, because he brings up right after you talking about the Japanese culture and the book about sex and just how to perform that, because that was one of their taboos, right? Not talking about
Right.
it. And what he's talking about in this book is the taboo against knowing who you are, right? So I wanted to talk real briefly about what is the function of taboo? Why is that a critical piece of any given culture? Because in order for us to understand the taboo that we've created in modern Western society, and I think it goes further back, but we're seeing it exacerbated in our current time. What is the function of taboo? How can it be functional? How can it be helpful? And when can it be detrimental?
Well, here's a like a modern example of like a taboo. Okay. And in my life, when I was in the military, a taboo was if you were experiencing PTSD or problems, traumas, it wasn't very cool of you to talk about it openly or to even seek help for it. And it made you seem like less of a man. And I think that is perfectly relatable to knowing the real you, because especially here in the West, right? Think about our past, think about our history. America has been fighting wars ever since its existence. And spirituality tends to have a taboo of being woo-woo or out there or not manly. That's not something that we do, especially in considering all of the actual physical religions and their mindsets. We've gotten away from connection to spirit and more about these almost disciplinary religions instead of an open acceptance of everything. Because these religions, there's nothing wrong with them. But when we're sitting here and we're saying, well, if you believe this, you're going to hell, or if you're this group of people, then it's our job to kill you or to convert you. That's where we've shifted, right? We've taken this one thing that was so beautiful and whole, and we've broken it off into different facets. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that per se. But when we start pointing at each other and saying, yeah, but you shouldn't do that, or yeah, but my way's better. And that's where I feel like the taboo comes into play, right? Because specifically about like what he's talking about, the taboo of knowing who you are and saying that I am the one, it is me. That's hard. That's a big pill to swallow for a lot of people, especially in religious communities. Could you imagine going into a Catholic church and being like, I'm God, everybody, and you are too? Could you imagine the surprise on people's faces? They would be flabbergasted.
Well, it's awesome how you drew the conversation that way, almost inadvertently, because my next point was talking about modern religion and how that fits in with taboo. Specifically, he talks about religion and Christianity very pointedly, where he speaks about it as being watered down or inaccessible, conceptually speaking, or even inarticulate for the mind of the modern person. And I think that there's some good mind fodder, there to think about. Not saying that there's something wrong with any one of these religions in general. In fact, if you look at the history of any of the major, 5 religions that are, dominating, world perspective at this time, each one of them at their core essence points to you being the you, right? You being
Sure.
God. However, we've become so far removed from some of those ideas, conceptually speaking. Like the mind of a Christian Gnostic in the first century is remarkably different than the mind of a Christian now. And the ideas being promulgated or advertised by the institutions or the infrastructure that is, any given church or temple or religion are very far removed from their original concepts. And those original concepts, and I speak about this all the time when it comes to people saying I'm spiritual but not religious. And I ask them, what do they mean by that? Well, I don't like any of the rigidity is one of the number one answers that I get. I don't like all the dogma and all of these things. And to a certain extent, I get that. But if you really look at the religions and you remove your, I guess, persona, the ego, the part that doesn't want to be told what to do, right? And you take it and you look at it a little bit differently, you understand that many of these religions are pointing us to the same thing. It's just that the mode of communication is outdated. And so he goes on to talk about this, and he says what they were trying to answer originally are the big questions: the universe and man's place in it, the human experience of I, or the problems of life, love, pain, and death, or even the biggest question, does any of this have meaning at all? And I think that hit me really, really deeply, because when I found Watts, I felt very agnostic. I wouldn't say atheistic. I didn't have any answers, and I felt lost simply because nothing seemed to make any sense. And there didn't seem to be any meaning to anything. So I was kind of in this nihilistic place. And I think what he's talking about is something that many of us go through, where we go through this nihilistic phase. Well, it doesn't have any meaning. I'm depressed. I'm anxious all the time. I don't understand what my place is in the world. And we start to just discredit everything because we see everything as an enemy. And what he wants to do is set up some, I guess, somewhat of a framework for us to explore the original truth that modern religions have lost their way in communicating to the general populace.
Yeah, totally. Here's something, is communication. Let's think on that for a second. Communication. He says there's the part in the first chapter, I believe, where he talks about the Maya. They have the same word for 5 different words, right? They have 5 different words that are for rain or something. And this is where Alan Watts really does a good job of bringing Zen and Buddhism to the West, because if you truly dissect Zen and Buddhism at its core value, if you dissect it, all of these other religions and all these other things that are taking place, they're all being translated from our perspective. And their words mean something different to them. Very much is in here, a word in English means something to us that may not mean. That's why people that are learning English tend to struggle, because they are missing words, or vice versa, or they don't know what a word is to describe something that it is that they're trying to describe. And that was the thing that really hit home for me, because when I first started doing all of this, regular Christianity didn't really do anything for me. I didn't get it. But when I started reading about Buddhism and I started reading about some of the things that they were talking about, it made so much more sense to me. It made way more sense to me that it is us that is the special thing, and that it's not this one deity or this one divine thing that we, bow down to. What they're trying to do is show us what you can be and who you are already when you are choosing to accept it. And what Alan Watts wants to do is, everyone is trying to find something. Everyone is seeking. And I've talked about this before, that, how many people have gone to the Himalayas or to a cave somewhere to find themselves, when, any good yogi or guru will tell you, you don't have to go anywhere to find yourself. You just have to find yourself. Go within. And that's what Alan Watts wants you to do. He wants you to accept you as the thing you're looking for. As he says, you're it. Accept you for who you are.
Right. And the major barrier that he goes on to speak about is the illusion of separateness of a non-unified field. And there's so much to unpack with this area of knowledge and experience. And he talks about tubes. I love his metaphor about just tubes, ever-evolving tubes. That we start as like a worm, and then we start to develop ganglia around certain, nerve centers, and we start to develop consciousness. And consciousness, while it is this incredible, especially the consciousness that human beings possess, incredible way of looking at the world, of being aware, of being able to dissect the little things and collect knowledge and collate into like vast volumes and libraries, is such an incredible piece of the puzzle. But at the same time, it's such a double-edged sword because it creates this illusion of separateness. And that is the major taboo that he's talking about. And it leads directly into this idea of Maya that you've already brought up, or the play of God in general in creating and manifesting the universe as itself. It's very interesting to me because so many of us get caught up in the thought forms, the mental clatter, the mental chatter, if you will, and all of the different labels that create the image of me, or the image of Cameron, or the image of the person listening right now. And that illusion of separateness is what leads us down the path of pain and suffering in general. And I think it's fascinating that is the taboo, the major taboo that every religion, every spiritual tradition, every path has been pointing to. And, it's like built in. It's not anybody's fault, right? Some people may have exacerbated the problem in one way or the other. But the coolest part about when you read this first chapter is that you realize that it's not really anybody's fault, right? Mm-hmm. It's a product of the situation that we're in. It's not nihilistic. In fact, it's amazing. And when you can remove yourself from the ego, from the persona, from the cage that you've built around yourself to help you define yourself and give yourself some meaning, you can, what does he talk about? He talks about the return of wonder and amazement instead of understanding and knowledge, right? Knowledge is like penetrating, right? Versus amazement and wonder is receptive. And so if we can take a step back from the image that we've built for ourselves, there, again, nothing wrong with the ego. I have to say this all the time because there's like in the spiritual community, such a war on ego. Ego serves a very important function, but can be very detrimental or poisonous to the spirit or to the soul or to experience in general if you allow it to control your perspective. He goes on to talk about this play of God, right? God manifests into all of the many forms, and in the particularly Hindu perspective, to play, to dance, to experience. And so knowing that entire consciousness, that entire spaciousness, that awareness that is God is also you at the same time as the image created by the ego of you, gives you the ability to shift between this penetrative, knowledge-seeking ego, right? Which is it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It allows us to experience things in more depth. It was given to us through the process of evolution, through spirit, consciousness in general, and that sense of wonder and amazement that you get from just pure awareness. And it's funny to me that is the taboo. Why is that, do you think, Cameron, that has become the primary taboo of human consciousness?
Unfortunately, because when we don't know our true selves, we're easier to manipulate. And I do think that some people, this is something that I thought about before we even got started, it's almost as if we've been asleep. Like maybe at some point we weren't, and then something happened, and then as a civilization or even just a race of people, we fell asleep. And it's clear that at some point in certain cultures, like this was taught, like this is taught for you to become self-aware, right? You look back in, again, Native American tribes, or even back in ancient India, the gurus, the swamis, the monks, they all know something very interesting, which is that they know themselves to be their true selves. What is the whole point of these monastic traditions and these teachings, right? Self-mastery and it all has to do with managing the mind. That's what it comes down to. As spiritual as it is, it really comes down to mastering your mind and being able to discern right from wrong and acting appropriately, right? Being able to be so aware of yourself that when things occur and things happen to you, you come from a place of neutrality, and you decide that you either are going to react this way or that way. And I think he even says that in the book. But what is happening is that when you become self-aware, things in life that normally would frustrate you, right? Because all the pain, the anger, the fear, that all comes from your mind, what we think we become. And what happens is when events and challenges in life come to us, if we're not self-aware, then we react in this flight or fight response. And usually it's fight, and we get frustrated, we get angry. God, why are you doing this to me? Why is the universe so hard on me, and this and that and this and that? Well, it's neither of those things are being hard on you. You're being hard on yourself. And when you are aware of that, life becomes, as you said, so much more beautiful, so much more vibrant. The color comes back to everything because you know that this is already perfect. And what a beautiful place that would be to be in. And the taboo of that, could you imagine if every person on earth actually felt that way and actually was that aware of themselves? It would be a lot difficult. It would be much more difficult to control people if we were all that self-aware.
Mm. True. And I kind of want to throw a monkey wrench into what we're talking about here for just a minute, right?
Go for it.
Because we, in the spiritual community particularly, we romanticize a lot of things. And sometimes with due course or for good reason. But other times I feel like we don't hit the real picture. We don't see the real picture. And we're talking about God, right? Being this infinite consciousness that manifests the entire universe, and every single thing is God playing this game.
Mm.
So who is this they? Who are these people, the system that is creating the suffering? If everything is God, it's God, right? So
yeah.
So that's a hard thing for people to accept. Why would God, this infinitely benevolent thing that's beyond comprehension, put us in a world? Yeah, why would it self-sabotage? And a lot of this.
Well,
go ahead.
Because there's two realities that we have to ask ourselves. Is it one, if this all-powerful thing that manifested us, if it really had the power to do that, then why do all of this long, prolonged self-awakening process? Why not just make us perfect in the beginning? And to my point is that, what is this reality? What is it that we're doing here on earth anyways? We're here to learn, right? If you were to ask God, what is my purpose? I'm sure the purpose answer would be to live. Right? But it seems pretty cut and dry to me. Like, you're here to live, you're here to experience, which tells me that there's something that each facet of us, each projection of the one thing, the one source, is experiencing all of this through us as like a vessel, right? Which means that there's things for us to learn. There's things for us to experience. And as vessels, we're in training. We're in training, but in the most beautiful, fun way. We're the ones that are making it difficult. People that want power, people that want to control things, they're the ones that are making it difficult. But it's also to the same effect and degree that it is also what's bringing us awake, right? Like, all these bad things that are happening in the world, like, it's super scary and it's super frustrating. But think about how many people are waking up right now. Think about how many people are starting to realize, like, the media is kind of full of crap. The government doesn't really work the way that I thought it does. I don't really like the people that are doing that. And and now we have the internet, we have this way of communicating with people that we haven't had before, and we're starting to see that we're all not that different.
And even further down that line, we start to awaken to the fact that when we start making enemies or demonizing other people who make different decisions that maybe we don't agree with, our ego, our image of ourselves don't agree with, that they're just doing what is necessary on their end, right? If everybody is God and everybody is playing a part, not saying that it's destined or fated or anything of that nature, but if everybody's going through this learning process, how are we expected, at least on our by our own higher selves, to act when it comes to judgment, right? You talked about people doing bad things, right? And to a certain extent, we have to have rule of law. We have to have an idea of how society should work because that's our collective idea. It's our collective space, right? What I fear is a tough thing for people to accept is that some of these things are necessary, right? Necessary evils. It's a healing process. If you think about humanity itself as an organism, you talked about these pains, these sufferings. This is the clarion call, if you will, the wake up call to higher levels of consciousness. It's growing pains, right? We have them as we grow. And I am not supporting, bad behavior or giving it any more food to increase, spiraling levels of hatred. But there is an understanding that some of us who have already come to this heart-centered, I guess, #woke perspective, need to adopt. And that is radical love, radical acceptance, and radical love, because we cannot revert or de-evolve to states of dehumanization and demonization of other people just because we disagree with them. There needs to be a level of discourse, right, that needs to occur. Otherwise, we lose the lesson that we're talking about right here in this, and that is the nature of who you are. Because when we devolve into I am X label or Y label, I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative, then we're missing the point, right? That you are it. And the only thing that we have control over at all is this particular manifestation, right? And that's how we have to act in the world. And I think that's incredibly relevant right now, because anybody who's pointing the finger right now, I guarantee you, needs to turn it right back around and analyze, because whatever is triggering you right now from other people's perspective is something that's also going on in you.
Yeah. You said it already. You said it earlier. You said, it's not really anybody's fault. And that's the truth. That's the real, honest truth. And that's also what can bring us together. You know what I mean? Like, on the base level, depending on how you see things, I think it's fair to say that we don't really get to choose how we come into this world. At least if we do choose, we're not aware of it, right? So for the most part, it's almost as if we don't really have the choice, because, again, we're not aware of it, even if we do get to choose, which means that everyone gets an equal but random shot at coming into this world, right? I came into this world as me, and I have, some of these things. I have a house, I have food, I have, things I'm grateful for. But there's people who don't get that. There's people who were born into horrible circumstances, and then they're left with no opportunity other than to commit crime or to do things that we deem as bad because we're in a, how can I be judgmental towards somebody that's committing crimes or doing these things when, I'm comfortable in a house and I have food and I have a job and I'm taken care of, how could I ever judge somebody that goes and commits murder because they're born and their mom and dad are crack addicts or whatever, and they're left abandoned at an early age? Like, when you think about it like that, right? Like, when you step out of yourself and look at it from their perspective, then it's easier to see how it's kind of, we're all on the same playing field. Some are just given a better opportunity than others. And how could we hate anyone, or how could we judge anyone because of that?
It's powerful words. Ones to think on, for sure. I for me, I always find myself blessed. I have been more blessed than most. And so I do my best to not judge, unless you're a jerk driver, somebody who just, doesn't care about anyone else. But I kind of wanted to use an end note where he was talking about common sense in the first chapter. It's something that so many people talk about, right? Common sense is a lost cause. Common sense is often misunderstood. And I liked the way that he put it. And there's some root words in it. Common sense is about community. It's about the communal sense. And the way that we live right now is very individualistic. It's me versus you, dog eat dog, climbing the social ladder, me against the world. Now, you can't have common sense when everybody has their own propaganda, right? That's why we've lost it. That's why there's so much disagreement, because there is no sense of community. And I think that's what we need to get back to, in particular here in the West, and probably worldwide as a whole, as a species, in order to recognize the self that we're talking about, or that Watts is talking about in the book. We need to have a common sense. We need to have some common ground. And that common ground should be what he's talking about. So it's kind of a Mobius strip here, right? We need to have the common ground that we are all aware of the fact that we're all the same. We're all interlinked, that this illusion of separateness needs to be dissolved. And the only way I can see it happening is not through intellect. It's not through education. It's not through domination. It's about radical acceptance. Acceptance and love and compassion, understanding that all of us are suffering. And nobody's suffering is greater than anyone else's, right? That's really hard for a lot of people to accept. It's hard for me to accept. I don't see my suffering as being on par with others, like you illustrated. But the fact of the matter is, we cannot come to any sense, any common communal sense, if we are constantly comparing. Because what comparing does is feeds the ego, that cycle of ego.
Yes.
And what the ego needs to survive, I was listening to Eckhart Tolle and Russell Brand, what the ego needs to survive is a separateness, an otherness. And it needs to make the other, whatever the other is, inferior in order to survive. So it almost needs like an acidic environment, right, to thrive. And if we take that away from it, then we can find some common ground. We can find some healing, some love, and some connectedness again, instead of comparison. Because one of the quotes that I love the most is comparison is the death of joy. And all of us want joy. All of us want happiness. All of us want to feel secure and loved, right? It's a very mammalian trait. We're not reptiles, even though we're trying to be right now. We're mammals at a very base form. And so we want that touchy-feely, that ooey-gooey, that wooey-wooey, right? That's what we want.
Definitely.
And we're not going to get there by comparison. And that's going to be tough. But I think that's what we're seeing right now. That's the healing process that's coming out. And I think it's awesome that we're talking about this book at this time.
I know. Yeah, the whole thing, it's like you said, it's a community. It has to be a decision that we make for each other. And the problem is we are individualistic right now. And that's the scary thing. That's why people are not accepting of that type of way, because they think that by embracing a community of love like that, or, becoming like a bunch of monks or something, that they're giving up something. They're giving up their identity, but that's the truth. They are. But that doesn't mean that you're giving up who you are, because one, you haven't truly discovered who you are yet, clearly, if you don't understand this. So 2, you need to get there. But then 3, when you get there, then there won't be this fear of giving up something. There won't be this fear because you'll have understood that the thing that you're hanging on to wasn't the real you anyways.
That's true. So to wrap up, Cameron, let's talk a little bit about like why we're doing this. You know, what's the point of Pages Illuminated, and what are we hoping to bring to our listeners and viewers?
What we want to do is we're starting off with some people that we think are people that can offer something to this particular group of humans at this time right now. Even though people like Alan Watts, Ron Ross, and others, even though they were at a earlier time in history teaching, it's more prevalent and more important now than ever. So we're trying to bring back some of these old school ideas from these books. And what we're hoping is that through this process that you'll find understanding for yourself. And if you're following me or Chris on any of our social medias or anything like that, then you already understand like what we're about and what we're trying to do. And this is for people who are lost right now, that are confused about themselves and what they want in life. These books can't do it for you, but what they can offer is a blueprint for you rediscovering yourself.
Yeah, there's an interesting part in the first chapter of this one, and I encourage everybody to pick up the book wherever you can. It's a really great book, but he talks about how books should not trap the mind. Books should point in the direction, and I heard this again echoed by Eckhart Tolle. Spiritual teaching is not to fill your mind with content. It's to remove it. It's to point the way for you to walk yourself, right? And so a good book should never fill your mind with more than you can handle. What it should do is remove some of the content that's already causing some suffering, right? And so what we're hoping to do is in this process, we'll start out each week with these YouTube videos, this series on YouTube. And then later on in the week, let's say Thursday, sounds good, right? We're going to do an Instagram live to discuss with our followers some more about this book. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, please join us. My handle is at SoulCoachLG. That's LG. And Cameron, what's yours?
So you can follow this information at Hermit_radio on Instagram. We'll both be going live on Thursdays, and feel free to come in and chat with us. This is more of like an analysis breakdown of the book. What we're going to do on Instagram is offer people a chance to talk to us directly through that platform to ask questions about that. So yeah, I'm excited. It's gonna be fun.
Right on. So everybody, if you found this fruitful, if you found some good mind food to chew on over the next few days, please join us on Instagram this upcoming Thursday, and we'll continue that cycle. And thank you. Awesome, Cameron. This has been fun.
All right, buddy.
Namaste, brother.